All right. Aloha and welcome to the 2022 HLA conference. My name is Charisse Costello, and I'll be facilitating this session. We're honored to have Kawena Komeiji from UH West Oahu, Lessa Kananiʻopua Pelayo-Lozada from Palos Verdes Library District, Neil Kapo'o Ordinario from San Jose University, and Annemarie Paikai from Leeward Community College present Aya Ke'ola I Kahiki, a discussion amongst Kānaka Diaspora librarians. Presenter's bio is available on the conference website, and this recording will be available to all conference attendees. You are all muted, so please type your questions in the chat box. And over to you, Kawena.
Aloha mai kākou, makahi o ka hoʻoia ʻaina, ia mā kōna pula o ke ia ʻaina nei, ke hoʻoia nei I ke ea o ke apuni mo I Hawaiʻi, a me kanoa hewa o Kualipua Amerika. Ola ka wai, ola ka ʻaina, ola lāhui Hawaiʻi. So aloha, my name is Kawena. I am the Hawaii Pacific Resources Librarian at UH West Oahu. I am also a member of Nā Hawaiʻi ʻImi loa, and I'll be moderating this panel, Ai Keola I Kahiki, a discussion amongst Kānaka Diaspora librarians. For this session, we'll be following Eve's talks etiquette for questions. And so we'll share that in the chat, and we mahalo you for your cooperation in following those guidelines. So with that said, I would like to have our speakers introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their experiences as Kānaka librarians growing up and or living away from Hawaii. So we'll start with Neil, jump to Lessa, and then finish up with Annemarie.
Aloha mai kākou. My name is Neil Ordinario. I'm at San Jose State University as a library technology coordinator. I received my MLS in 2018. I'm from Honolulu, Moku'ewa, Mokupuni o Oahu Nua. My dad's family is from Kalihi, Oahu, and my mom is the daughter of sugarcane, from the sugarcane plantations in Ewa. I was the first of my ohana to move to the San Francisco Bay Area to the unceded lands of the Moekma in the late 80s, and my parents and my sister moved a year later. For me, the library has always been that source of information, growing up, because I wasn't on the ʻāina, so that's it. I always went to the library to get books, and then later on, for Wi-Fi access, just to go online, and and because I always felt ashamed coming back to Hawaii to visit family, because I was like a book Hawaiian to them, and because I didn't have my hands in the soil, and it wasn't until I actually went to library school and I took an indigenous librarianship job, and it forced me to look at my dad, my Kānaka dad, and to really connect what truly was Ike, right? It was Ike kūpuna, what he was doing, even on the continent, how he was gardening, how he was fishing, and everything he was doing. And to the mo'olelo that he would tell us, and to the mele he was singing to us. And for me, connecting it led me to connect to how we're teaching our our keiki generation, and then the students that I am talking to or I'm crossing paths with. It's that olelo neo is a'ohe pau ka ike ka palau o kahi. All knowledge is not taught in the same school, so it's the art of doing, right? The art of being Hawaiian, and just the art of being native. And so as a librarian now, it's connecting with the native nation, the Moekma in our area, to provide them the service, because knowing how Hawaii is, occupation of Hawaii, I can see myself the irony of me being a native settler on another native land. So I feel like it's my kuleana to make sure that we are serving that that nation appropriately. That's all.
We shouldn't have had Neil go first.
So my background is I am born and raised in Los Angeles on Tongva land, and I've never lived outside of LA County. My grandparents moved to the continent separately for military service. My papa is from Wahiawa, and our Na'awau family is from Kipahulu, Maui, and my tutu is from Papakolea. And they created and cultivated a life of Hawaiianness for us in Los Angeles. So like I talked about a little bit earlier today, you know, they were always giving us general aspects of our culture, like music and food and culture. But it wasn't necessarily kind of the deep-seated stories and hoʻōla and just kind of like all the things that I feel like maybe I lost a little bit or didn't have, you know, because there are things when you are continent-born Hawaiian that you do, like in 5th grade, you go to Kamehameha School summer camp. You know, I didn't go. I'm the only one out of all the kids, me and my cousin who were the same age, didn't go. And so like they came back with all of these stories and all of this knowledge that we didn't have. And a little bit of that, I think, is because both of my parents are born and raised in Torrance, California. My mom's side is colonizers from England who fought in the American Revolution. I was a daughter of the American Revolution for a short time until I think I really understood what that meant to be in that organization. But they gave me scholarships. They got me through grad school. So, you know, they're trying to do some good work. But I think that kind of colonized and colonizer shows up in my mediation styles as well as my leadership styles, where I think my approach, you know, and where I feel like it means for me to be a Kānaka librarian kind of stems from, because of that mixed race outlook and figuring out how to connect to the culture. You know, Neil mentioned being a book Hawaiian, and that's, I feel like, how I kind of started, right? Like I came really for the first time as an adult for a family reunion in Hana Maui, where I got to meet all the people that I had heard about who would visit us, you know, and we'd go to Disneyland and stuff with. But that experience really influenced my college curriculum and where I wanted to take the academic approach, because that was what was most familiar to me, to being able to understand how I fit into this world that I was born into, but didn't necessarily feel like I belonged to. So within librarianship, you know, I think that the question of being involved, like I always get a little bit nervous when people ask me because of that imposter syndrome, right? Like, how does it lead in? And because I think that the values that, you know, have been built into all of us, you know, of what I talked about this morning, like Kupua and Kuleana, but also just understanding that we are doing this like for the lāhui, right? Like it's for all of us. That is how I think it shows up for me in librarianship, and that desire to be of service. And that it's so ingrained in it that I think when it comes out and people recognize what it is, it's surprising to me. So I think it performs for me in a different kind of leadership style within libraries, one that is much more collaborative, much more harmonizing, and a lot less kind of authoritarian and take down. So yeah.
Aloha mai kākou. My name is Annemarie Paikai. I'm the Hawaii Pacific Researchers Librarian here at Leeward Community College. Before I give my hoʻōla, I just wanted to also say that I'm really honored that Neil and Lessa have been able to join us here today. We're all in person. We've been doing the prep for this panel online, and it's been the experience of doing this. I didn't realize it was going to be so therapeutic to be able to talk to other Kānaka librarians that have this continent kind of thread in our history and our background. And I'm just really wanted to say mahalo to both of you for being here today, and just being able to be in the same space is just so exciting. And I want to say Kawena mahalo for just like being the moderator and just connecting all of us. I think you really are the connector in so many ways in these spaces, and you just brought us all together. And I think I'm just so grateful to be your friend, and I just appreciate you so much. Okay, enough sappy stuff, but that's kind of how I operate. Okay. My name is Annemarie Paikai. My maiden name is Abiel. I was born and raised in the Bay Area in Livermore. My father was born and raised in Kahiki, and my mom is from a little town in the Midwest called Troy, Kansas. And they met in California and raised myself and my brother there. All of them are still in California, though my mom and dad are no longer together. My story with my dad, at least, has felt a lot of, I felt in retrospect and being able to sort of reflect on my growing up, I've noticed that my dad has been he really chose to assimilate into our community. And so there was less community building for me. I felt like in my growing up, other than I did come back regularly and was able to see my family here, but a lot of my dad's approach to being a Kānaka at that time, he's very brown, but he really chose to lean into being assimilating and trying to fit into what our community was that he moved into. And so that's really, it's taken me a while to really understand the impact of that on him and myself and my brother as well. And so when I was 18, despite all that though, when I was 18 or 17 or whatever, looking at schools, I discovered that Hawaiian Studies was an option for me, and I moved to UH Hilo. I moved to Hilo and went to UH Hilo to get my degree in Hawaiian Studies from Kahaka Ke'alikolani. And I also studied hula there at Hawaii Community College under Unupupupu with Sapori Tangaro. Both of those experiences really shaped the kuana ike that I started to come from, or that I started to build. The irony of my dad assimilating to life in California was that I tried my hardest to assimilate into being Hawaiian and what that meant and what that really felt like. And so I think not fully understanding, but knowing that I talked different and I couldn't speak the same way, and like I walked into this experience assuming that everybody knew everything about being Hawaiian and I knew nothing about being Hawaiian. And so in some ways that served me well because it allowed me to just be a sponge, but in the same way, it really like put a wall up into my own ability to recognize that I had knowledge too, but based on being Hawaiian and being raised by Hawaiian and all of those things. So it's been a really interesting reflective process thinking about all of these things. Going into libraries, I was also a book Hawaiian in that I was raised, my mom raised us into libraries. We were going to the library all the time. I read my whole life, and immediately when I went to UH Hilo, I wanted to work in the library, and working in the Hawaiian collection was my sort of one of my other ways or my pathways to being able to learn about what it meant to be Hawaii and what Hawaiian history and all of these different things was in a library in the Hawaiian collection. I didn't know I wanted to be a librarian though. I never thought that until I started looking at archives and realizing like, oh, I want to read people's stories. Like I recognize that being able to, the instigator, I think for me was I got to start reading some letters in ʻōlelo Hawaii. And so using my schooling and the ability to understand ʻōlelo Hawaii and being able to read archives from people in the 1800s just really like pushed me over the edge and I just wanted to be in archives. I wanted to be able to take care of these mo'olelo and make sure that they were better accessible to our Hawaii. And so I have moved away from archives because of the realities of what it means to live in Hawaii. Realistically, you sort of need to have a position that allows you the finances to live. And so I moved more towards academic librarianship, which I'm really grateful for because it's allowed me to sort of reflect on my time as a student and what it meant to try and build my own identity through this academic journey. And I can help students, or I can see that students were not that dissimilar from what I was like when I was a student, in that so many of us are, even if they haven't been raised on the continent or somewhere else, so many of us are still really far away from our ʻāina kūpuna, or the lands that our families originally come from. Despite still being in Hawaii, we've been displaced all over. And so really being able to key in on that and help students and think about how I'm helping my students and my community with reconnecting back to identity through library collections and through the library and through all these different academic and educational spaces has really been a big part of what it means for me to be a Kānaka librarian. Yeah.
Mahalo ya ʻoukou. So as you know, our panel is called Aikeola Kahiki. So we're hoping, Annemarie Paikai, that you can explain a little bit about what this idea of kahiki, what it means, and what it means in today's context and so.
Yeah, mahalo Kawena. And I'm hoping that we can all sort of like, we've got a few questions, but we all sort of can chime in wherever. The nice thing is we have this panel, so we can go back and forth. But yeah, so we titled our presentation Aikeola Kahiki. And when we think about kahiki, especially when we read our mo'olelo kahiko, kahiki is the place that our kūpuna came from and migrated from. And I just thought it was a really interesting juxtaposition to think about the ways in which our people are migrating away from Hawaii now, and how Hawaii is starting to become our kahiki in a lot of ways because of the realities of why our people are moving away. And so I wanted to just sort of, I guess, untangle or think about the way that kahiki and what kahiki represents to us historically, and how it's this space of all these people who share such similar linguistic traits and all kinds of different things that we really find in family, but due to boundaries of colonization, it's really shifted the way that we think about, or the relationships that we build now and where we're migrating to, as opposed to us thinking about, like, if we migrated to other places where our kūpuna came from, we're actually migrating away from that towards other indigenous communities on the continent and other places. And so I just wanted to sort of break that down a little bit and have us think about, like, what does that mean for kahiki to be suddenly Hawaii for many of our Hawaii who are having to move away, like all of our families have had to do. And so, yeah, I think that's most of what I wanted to say about that, other than if anyone is really interested in knowing more about kahiki. Emma Lani Case just recently came out with a book called Everything Ancient Was Once New, that really kind of talks about metaphorically what kahiki represents to us. And I think she talks a lot about our kūpuna and this like metaphorical space that allows us to imagine what a future could be and what that means for our people. And I don't know that necessarily it's like completely a bad thing that Hawaii becomes our kahiki, but I think for all of us, when we imagine coming home, or, I mean, for me, I've been able to luckily make a life here, but I don't know that that's a reality for all of our people, is understanding what it means to actually come home back to Hawaii, and if that ever will be possible to the way that we're going. So yeah, I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to say about it.
I think on the topic of coming home, like, it's tough, right? Like, because a lot of, I feel, my journey in libraries has been because of the flexibility of librarianship, that you can do it pretty much anywhere. And so that means that I could go anywhere. But the one place that I'm always hesitant to look for jobs and figure out if I can go is here. And it's because that draw, I feel like I feel like once I come back, you can't leave, right? Like, that's it. And so to make that commitment and to leave behind kind of that multiracial bifurcated reality that I've known for so long is a really, really big step for me. But I also feel like, having gone through this journey of being ALA president and what it means to be kind of like the first Kānaka in this role, that people don't even understand what a Hawaiian is, right? The conversation always starts with, oh, when did you move to LA, right? And so really doing this educational process really makes me feel much more drawn, I think, to figure out what that life looks like for myself and my family. Yeah.
I don't think I'll ever come home. And it worries me. And, you know, I visit a lot. And I thought about it. I've actually searched for like jobs to come home, but I mean, also, for some odd reason, my family's decided to live in the two most expensive places in the world, Hawaii and then to the Bay Area. And then, but like I'm so vested into my work now. It's hard to leave that and then leave, you know, my parents go back and forth, but mostly my mom, but then to leave my dad, because my dad does not want to come back. You know, just like your dad, just like assimilated into the continent, you know, and that's it for him. That's his home now. But you know, so it's that responsibility of staying with him to make sure he's okay. Even though my sister is okay. And coming home, I have to stay with my dad. And that involves like making sure that, you know, like ensuring that I'm gonna be okay as well and in the future. And it's hard. And you know, I have to, you know, I'm trying to teach like the keiki, like my nieces and my nephews, just to like kind of like learn, but from that perspective of not, you know, not being independent, and, you know, being, you know, Hawaiian. So basically being Hawaiian, trying to be Hawaiian, right? And yeah, it's Hawaii is just you know, Kahiki is just like a far dream to.
That's very powerful, you guys. I can see everyone getting a little emotional. Yeah, people want to a little.
Oh.
So you know, living and working in the States, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are often lumped together under one term, AAPI. So for yourself as a Kānaka, how do you differentiate between the two in an environment where people might not know that they're separate? Is it appropriate to untangle ourselves, or does it help us to stay together in that category?
You know, for me, there's this understanding that we're needed for numbers. Pacifica is needed for numbers. And I've been willing to stand with my Asian brothers and sisters, right? And as well as, you know, because my family is, you know, I can search my family because we're Filipino, but when do I see that same, like, you know, solidarity when we're talking about the mountain, right? When we're talking about military tourism, Red Hill, you know, I don't, and it's hard because I want to, you know, and also like a topic that we are talking about earlier, like Micronesia, you know, and it's hard being in when there's so little of us on the continent, that we're so marginalized, but they need us, right? And we actually need them, but they're, you know, they need us to get their numbers up, to get even a more voice. And so as much as it like pains me to be, you know, to go into Asia, to speak in or participate in Asian American Pacific Islanders, I have to, like, for me, that's been the kuleana that I've like been blessed, been bestowed upon. Like, I need to talk about like Pacifica rights and make sure that if they're going to include PI, then they better be speaking about PI. But then it comes to the next step, it's like, you know, I'm starting to become this spokesman, like on my campus. Like we just started a Asian American Pacific Islander like center for our campus. And I was in the hiring committee for the 3 people that were hired for them. There's other Pacific Islanders on campus, but they asked me, I was the first choice for all 3. And it's like a heavy burden on me, right? To be able to represent. And not only, you know, like when Tonga had the tsunami, like they asked me, and like, I don't have a ohana in Tonga. What do I know about it, right? So being that spokesman for Pacifica, you know, when I can't, you know, when it's hard to even just be a spokesman for Hawaii is difficult. And then when I have that voice, when they're giving me that voice, making sure that I am not just Kānaka centric in speaking that I make sure that I'm including Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia, what have you, is just like, it's this responsibility that, you know, that's all in cycles in my life have like maybe like take steps back. Like, I don't want this part. And, you know, I have to kind of force myself to be a part of this movement just because otherwise I don't know who's going to be out there to take that responsibility, you know? And so that's this weight that, you know, I believe a lot of the Kānaka people on the continent have to endure, right? You know, for me, it's like, oh, I'm trying to be Hawaiian, you know, like always talking to my family here, but, you know, I also have to represent all the, everybody here, and it's just like so much work, and I don't know sometimes. Yeah, you know, Annemarie said therapeutic, this whole thing, just from the first time we we had our Zoom, I was like, unreal.
It's a lot of pressure to have to be in those roles, right? So I've been very thankful that Neil has joined the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association, because I was kind of the only one for a really long time. And folks who brought me in, right, were like Filipinos who did hula and loved Hawaii, and were very confused also about my relationship and our relationship and what that looked like. And I spent a lot of my time in Apala always saying, what about Pacific Islanders? What in this is Pacific Islander? You know, there was a book that came out that I contributed a chapter to, and it was supposed to be titled AAPIs and Librarianship. And in my article, they edited out the Pacific Islander part. Even though I contributed a whole portion of the story time, right, to making sure that the article that I was writing was inclusive of it. And they just talked about Asian Americans. They left in all the Pacific Islanders stuff, but didn't state it explicitly. And so this representation that you bring, I think that pressure is sometimes what makes me shirk away from that question of, well, what does it mean to be a Kānaka librarian, right? In these spaces, this is when I felt the most comfortable being able to talk about it, because it's not representing everyone and everything and all of that kind of a thing, and being the token, right? Like being the one that they call on. And I was kind of worried when Neil joined, because I was like, oh great, I'm busy now, so it's all gonna go to Neil. Like he's gonna get stuck being our representative now. And so untangling those things I think is really important, but also to your point of numbers and federal dollars and where do those go, but making sure that they go to Pacific Islanders also is important.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting hearing both of you talk, because it feels like a little removed from me at least. Like it's not as much of a discussion other than me seeing like various reading lists or AAPI month, and it's like all Asian American stuff. And so I mean, but it's not a whole lot of consequence to me, because I'm here in this like Hawaii centered place, sometimes mostly, where, you know, it's not as much of an impact. But when you're talking about community, which I think is really interesting, you're talking about finding like solidarity and relationships in your space where you're often the only one. I mean, we're often the only like person of color in our libraries, much less the only like any other Indigenous or Kānaka librarian, and then having to be that representation that you're talking about. I think another thing that you both have sort of hit on too that I think is really interesting is like being the representative. And I remember this from being there too, but like being this representation of Hawaii and being responsible for like pushing back on all these romanticized views of what Hawaii and Pacific Islands means. And then also like going back to your family and not being enough Hawaii or enough Hawaiian, and having this like imposter syndrome that you're dealing with all the time because you just are not surrounded by it. So how do you build up any kind of like knowledge or challenge from your actual community, like talking about these things? So it's so lonely. It's so lonely trying to be the representation for everything. And I don't even know, like you said, you know, we need all our communities to help us with things like Mauna Kea and rallying around Red Hill and understanding that these issues impact more than just Hawaii, you know, and at the same time, if we're getting couched and not listened to, like, what is the value there as well? So it's really powerful hearing you both.
Okay, so this is sort of related to what everybody has talked about so far, but specifically for Lessa, how can we and how do we rebuild community and what happens when you can't?
So I think that, you know, to the point of our conversation is when you're in the diaspora, you're looking for it wherever you can get it, right? So there are similarities between Asian American culture, you know, Southeast Asian culture, and, you know, Pacific Islanders and being Kānaka, you know, especially, you know, with grandparents who came from Hawaii, right? Like when they got to LA, in addition to building Hawaiian community, they were also part of JCI, you know, and all these like Japanese American groups too. And so finding those areas, I think, is really important as long as you can hang on to your sense of identity and you can really understand what you are getting out of it and making sure that it's a reciprocal relationship, and that you're not just just being that singular representative. But I think that it's also building it and finding those folks around you and finding community like we have here through Twitter or and through other arenas, right? Like when I found, Kānaka Twitter, I was like, this is amazing, like that, and finding just all those different communities that do make it within libraries specifically and building those collections so that people will see themselves in it and come in, and then you can make those connections also, I think is really important. The other thing that I wanted to just kind of mention in this building community is the importance of cultural humility and cultural education, because it's a big part of it. Because sometimes you can find community with other cultures and in different areas, right? There are so many different intersectionalities and different identities that can bring us together. And so being open to that, I think, is really important in addition to building the space.
I think this is such an interesting question for me because, my experience on the continent trying to rebuild community was like very piecemeal as far as like my dad had friends that were like from Hawaii but weren't necessarily Hawaiian, and so that became our community a little bit too. And so sort of determining like what that looks like when you're away and like trying to rebuild or really understand what your identity is in that kind of a context, like it becomes like these weird things that you sort of find commonalities with that may or may not be totally authentic. And so like finding like the other people that dance kula or whatever it is that's over there, and like finding other people that are interested in it. It's not always Hawaiians, like sometimes it's like, and so I think this cultural humility thing that you're talking about is not that that's a thing, it's a fair, yes, I know what it is. Anyways, cultural humility, just like thinking about what that means over there and how many, remembering as Indigenous people who don't often have control of our ʻāina, remembering to try and honor the people who are there, whose Indigenous land we are on, for one thing. And then also, like being part of this like migratory group of almost people who have migrated there, and people of color that are trying to sort of build this community around this commonality of we're all away from our homeland, or we're all away, and then trying to also honor that because we can recognize that that's happening at home as well. It's just, I think processing what that means and what that looks like, and
it's interesting or kind of sad, but I came home, but at the same time my university was having like this workshop about getting grounded back into your culture, and I was like, oh, I wish I was there. And I asked if it was hybrid, and they said no, it's not, it's just in person. I was like, oh, but we've had actual like Kānaka students that have come to our university, San Jose State, and they left because they didn't find community in San Jose State, right? They just got super homesick, and it just brings it back to like putting I had to put myself out there, right? As just, I had to be a pillar for students. And, it really isn't in my nature to kind of, I'm usually in the back work, my cubicle doing my work. But in order, had like one of my friends kind of, he DM'd me and said, oh, this guy, he was my student back here, and he's not doing well, and I actually, it was too late because I guess he transferred out by the time I got this message. But it was like, sometimes for me it's just breaking that struggle just to be out there for our students, so for our Kānaka students or even our Pacific Islander students, and then making sure that to learn their, like, part of why I never really did the affinity clubs, the student affinity clubs, when I was even an undergrad or a grad, because I just did it, a lot of it was just too social, and I was too cool at that point, right? But like now as a staff person, librarian, I was like, it's never too late. And if you ever need calm, and if you ever want to connect to, to your culture, even as a diaspora Kanaka, it's never too late. And, it'll come, right? You'll get that, that call, that kahea that tells you, oh, I shouldn't, where's my roots at? And I tell them, like, yeah, I'll tell you my journey. I'm more than willing to tell you my journey just to learn, and hopefully Kanaka Twitter will be there. We'll still be there, but because it helps, right? It just helps to find like-minded people or people really wanting to learn. And when you see people wanting to learn, for me, it's like I gotta, all that strength just to come out and like be there for them, and a lot of it is being there for the next generation.
Well, and to your point, Neil, also, I think the way that you approach it is really important in building community because it's meeting people where they are in their journey, right? At different points, we're going to be more comfortable. Like when I was in college, I walked by the Pacific Islander group on campus, but I was like, I don't look like them. I don't sound like them. I don't belong. And so when my sister was going to college, I was like, we're going to go. Like, you're going to go, you're going to be confident. And they looked at her and they were like, are you lost? Like, who are you looking for? And I was like, oh, because my husband is very active in the Pacific Islander community college community at home. And I was like, oh, my husband's Christian. They're like, oh, Christian, like he's the in. My Filipino and white husband is my in into that academic world. And so when you're open to folks and you're like, wherever you are in this journey, there's always space for you. I think that's the most important thing to building it up.
So just a reminder to everybody in this session, if you have questions, you can drop it in the chat. Or you can message it privately to me as well. But this question is for all of you, and it's a very heavy question. And you guys can fight for who goes first. But so what does a return of Kānaka to Hawaii look like? And how can libraries, archives, and other institutions facilitate this return? And what are some possible issues there?
I go first. Because I did come home. I think so. I think based on just on my story alone, like I came at a really, really good time in my life because I was fresh out of high school. I was in a place where I really wanted to learn more in a way that I didn't know that I would later not be able to necessarily. And I've since been able to sort of use that as my platform to sort of establish my life here. And I think it becomes really a lot harder when you establish a life someplace else. I know that that's at least the story for my dad, and it feels like that's similar to the both of you. And so what does it take for Kānaka Hawaii to come home? I think it's that's a really complex question mixed with desire. And I mean, one thing that I just want to sort of point out that all three of us, I think, are dealing with today is that we don't really talk about this identity part of ourselves very often, especially in a public place. And so choosing to come home and acknowledge or grapple with all of that lack that you went through, whether you grew up away or just spent a significant time away is a really vulnerable thing to do. It really puts you in this place of having to, well, for me, it was relearning a lot of things, unlearning and relearning a lot of cues and language, and just being in relationship with people that I had not been taught how to be in relationship with people before. And so, and then being acknowledging the potential for being ashamed of that when you're here, because it can be a shameful thing. And so then you have this tendency to maybe want to cover up that that's your history, or that is a significant part of who you are, because it's just this multi-layered thing. And so bringing Kānaka home, I think, is, I mean, I want that to happen, like it's scary watching everybody leave, especially someone who has experienced what it means to leave. or what it means for your future generations to be, because I didn't have a choice in that. I was raised there. And so it's scary. And it's also scary coming home. As Lessa kind of pointed out, you know, like it means grappling with all of these things. I think thinking about libraries and archives, what I've sort of been thinking a lot about is how, you know, like within the context of us losing so much due to colonization, including, you know, like what it means to take care of our own knowledge in a Kānaka Hawaii or Hawaiian worldview. I think that libraries and archives still do have the ability, despite that, to be that sort of instigator to bring people back to that desire to learn and to remember, because it sort of serves as like our stand-in kūpuna for a lot of us that didn't grow up with our kūpuna and that didn't have the ability to like talk story with people or even have anything transmitted down to us. I think libraries and archives still have that potential to be that stand-in, despite it not being a relationship. We have to create a relationship with those that have passed on through our archives and our libraries. And so I think that's why this work is really important to me, is because it did provide that space for me to be able to engage with that in a way that's like a little bit more passive and a little bit less shameful, because you have to ask all these questions that you should know as a Hawaiian, but you don't. And so before I get too more emotional, I'll pass on the mic. But anyways, that's, yeah.
Well, and I think on an institutional level, I think institutions have a responsibility to make sure that we are cultivating the community to be ready to take on these positions and to have positions ready for us when we are ready to take them on. You know, like we were listening to about the work that you folks are doing here at Leeward earlier, you know, recognizing what those barriers are and providing mechanisms for those opportunities, I think is essential. And we have to do that at an institutional level and put money behind it also.
Thinking about the return of Kānaka, I think when we value ʻike kūpuna and see that as a ways of living, rather than this capitalist society of trying to sell culture, right? Like we need to ask people that are here, that are sellers here, are you doing good or are you doing well, right? Off of the ʻāina, off of, you know, Mai Hawaiʻi, because we need to, when we can value like Kānaka and their ʻike, and place that as a way that we can come back to the ʻāina and survive, and not even survive, to thrive. I think that's when, you know, we'll have that return, right? But until that happens, when we're being priced out because selling something or selling services that aren't, you know, that aren't in line with our values is more important than, you know, the way my dad fishes, right? There's no way a lot of, like, you know, the kūpuna are gonna want to come back, or any of the Kānaka that have left. Oh, shut the lights down.
Mahalo to you folks for sharing your stories. I know it can be very personal. So I think we all here really mahalo you folks for doing that. We have like 2 minutes left. Is there any like closing mana'o you want to share?
I just want to say how thankful I am for this opportunity. I think to come home and really feel like I belong, I think has been really, really, special is not the right word. I can't think of a better word for it, and I will cry. So I'm just going to stop now and say thank you to you folks, and also you folks who I will meet and have met, some of you virtually. It's really important. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to mahalo everybody on this panel. Annemarie, just being able to tell my experiences that I asked. You know, it's the one thing that I always like. There's 2 things I talk about, like AA/PI and diaspora. You know, making sure that, like, you know, I'm there, right? That I can be a part of. And that's always been hard, but you know, with you guys, it's been like the catharsis, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna cry, but I'm just gonna echo that. Like, it's just, I didn't know that I needed this. I didn't know that I needed to find community in this kind of a context. I knew that coming home has given me a different kind of foundation and a different ability to sort of like access different weekend, but being able to find a community within people that also share that same commonality with me has been a really powerful way of shifting my own mindset too, and I'm just so grateful.
All right, thank you guys. Mahalo, Kawena, Lessa, Neil, and Annemarie, and everyone for participating in this session. Please use this, I'm going to put in the chat real quick, this link for the evaluation. To provide some feedback, this evaluation link is also available in the session description of the schedule on the conference website, and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you again. Have a good one.
All Cherise.
Thank you.